Okay. Make sure I got that there. Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Shabbat Shalom. Make sure the mic's working. Good to see you all. We're back here in the sanctuary. Last time on our lonesome, so I don't know what that is, but we're gonna have a good time in any case. And Cantor Lauren, we'll get started with a really beautiful nigun. We heard it last week. Let's try to remember it. We'll try to bring it back again. Service together on page 186. Page 192, very top of the page, Matovu. Together to page 195 and read a blessing for our bodies in English at the very top of the page. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the universe. With divine wisdom you have made our bodies, combining veins, arteries, and vital organs into a finely balanced network. Wondrous maker and sustainer of life, were one of them to fail, how well we are aware. We would lack the strength to stand before you. Blessed are you, Adonai, source of our health and strength. Baruch atah Adonai, rofeh chol basar umafli la'asot. We'll turn now to page 196.
Ata verata
together on the bottom of page 197. My soul came to me pure, drawn from the reservoir of the holy. All the time it remains within me, I am thankful for its thirst for compassion and justice. Let my eyes behold the beauty of all creatures, and let my hands know the privilege of righteous deeds. Baruch atah Adonai, asher biado nefesh kol chai veruach kol basar ish. We now rise in body or spirit as we turn to page 198. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lasach bivina, lachid me'yov v'layla. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, bokeach ivrim. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, matir asurim. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, zokech yefufim. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, rokah haaretz al hamayim. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, hamechin mitzatei gaver. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, malbish arumim. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, hanoten le'alev koach. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, Amalir shena meinai utnuma me'af apai. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, she'asani b'tzelem Elohim. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, she'asani ben chorim. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, she'asani Israel. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, ozer Yisrael b'gvura. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, oter Yisrael b'tifara. If you're still standing at home, please be seated. We're on page 204, the very top of the page. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. O Adonai our God, let the words of Torah be sweet in our mouths and the mouths of your people Israel, so that we, our descendants, and the descendants of all your people Israel, may know you by studying your Torah for its own sake. Blessed are you, Adonai, who teaches Torah to your people Israel. Baruch atah Adonai, hamelamed Torah le'amo Yisrael. We're now on page 206. Elu devarim she'ein lahem shiur, she'adam ochel perotehem ba'olam hazeh, v'akeren kayemet lo le'olam haba, ve'elu hen kibud avayim ugmilut chasadim, ve'hashkamahat beit hamidrash shacharit ve'aravit, ve'hachnasat orchim u'bikor cholim, ve'achnasat kala levayat hamet v'yun tefillah, ve'avat shalom ben adam la'chavero, ve'talmud Torah keneged kulam. We will rise in body or spirit as we turn to page 212 for the opening blessing of Pezukei Zimra. Baruch shehamar ve'haya ha'olam, Baruch hu, Baruch hoseh bereshit, Baruch Omer ve'osem, Baruch Gozer u'mekayem, Baruch merachem al haaretz, Baruch merachem al habriot, Baruch meshalem sachar tov lirehav, Baruch Hailad ve'kayam lanetzach, Baruch podeh u'matzil, Baruch shemo. Mishpachot u'bizmirot negadelcha, u'nshabechecha nefayercha v'nazkir shimcha v'namlichecha, Malkeinu Eloheinu, Yachid Che'olamim, Melech meshubach u'mufoar deyad shemo hagadol, Baruch atah Adonai, Melech mehulal batishbachot. Now on page 214, if you're still standing, please be seated. Second line down in Hebrew. Tov lehodon l'Adonai, Tov lehodon l'Adonai, ulezamer, leshimcha elyon. להודות לאדוני, להגיד בבוקר חסדך, להגיד בבוקר חסדך, ואמונתך בלילות, ואמונתך בלילות, טוב להודות לאדוני. עלי אסור ועלי נבל, עלי היגיון בכינור, כי שימחתני אדוני בפועלך, במעשה ידך רנן. מה גדלו מעשיך ים, מאוד עמקו מחשבותיך. מה גדלו מעשיך ים, מאוד עמקו מחשבותיך. מה גדלו מעשיך ים, מאוד עמקו מחשבותיך. Now on page 215. אשרי יושבי ביתך, עוד יהללוך, עוד יהללוך. אשרי יושבי ביתך, עוד יהללוך, עוד יהללוך. סלה. ואנחנו נברך יה, מעתה ועד עולם, מעתה ועד עולם, מעתה ועד עולם. הללויה, הללויה, Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Psalm 150, page 218. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. Hallelujah, 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 El Bekodsho, hallelujah, Birkiauzo, hallelujah, Bigvuratav, hallelujah, Kerokulo, hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. Hallelujah, 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 beteka shofar, hallelujah, benevel bechinor, hallelujah, betof umachor, hallelujah, beminim ve'ugam, hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Hallelujah, 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 Betziatlei Shama, hallelujah, Betziatlei Trua, Kol Shama Tehillah, Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. Nishmat kol echai tevarech et shimcha Adonai Eloheinu. We continue silently. Okay, we're on page 220 at the very top. Ilufinu maleh shir hakayam ulshonenu rina kamon galav vesiftotenu shebach kemarchevei rakia veinenu meirot kashemesh vechayareach Ve'yadeinu frusot kenishrei shamayim Ve'ragleinu kalot kahayalot Ein anachnu maspikim lehodot lecha Adonai Eloheinu ve'Elohei avotenu ve'imotenu. Continue silent. We're on page 222, the second paragraph down from the top. Shochen had marom v'kadosh shemo v'chatuv v'hanenu tzadikim b'Adonai la yesharim na'abah tehillah Befi yesharim tit halalu v'divrei tzadikim tit barach u'bilshon chasidim tit romamu v'kerev kedoshim tit kadash uvma kehalot Rivevot amcha beit Yisrael berina yitpa'ar Shimcha malkeinu bechol dor Vador Yababai Yababai Bye 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 Yababai Yababai Bye Bye Yai bye bye, yai bye bye, yai bye bye, bye bye. Yai bye bye, yai bye bye, yai bye bye. We now rise in body or spirit as we turn to page 223 for the concluding blessing of Bezukah de Zimra, and remain standing again in body or spirit through the Chatzi Kaddish on the next page and the Baruch Hu on the page after that. Yishtabach shimecha alad malkeinu Ha'el ha'melech ha'gadol v'ha'kadosh b'shamayim u'va'aretz Ki lecha na'e Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei avotenu ve'imotenu Shiru shvacha la v'zimra ha'ozu memshala ha'netzach Gedula u'gvura tila v'tiferet kedusha u'malchut Brachot vehodaot me'ata v'ad olam Baruch atah Adonai El melech gadol batishbachot El ahodaot Adon haniflaot Habocher b'shirei zimra Melech el chei ha'olamim Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei rabbah Be'alma divrach chirutei ve'amlich malchutei V'chaychonu v'yamechonu v'chayei l'chol Beit Yisrael B'hagala u'bizman kariv v'yimeru Amen V'yishmer Abba mevarach le'alam le'almei almayam Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpahar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh v'yitadahar v'yitale v'yitalal shemei dekucha Leila min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechamata damiran me'alma v'yimeru Amen. Barechu et Adonai hamevorach.
Baruch Adonai hamevorach le'olam va'ed.
Baruch Adonai hamevorach le'olam va'ed. Please be seated at home. We're now on page 228. We'll begin by reading the English at the bottom and then the 3 lines in Hebrew just above, beginning with Or Chadash. Praised are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the universe, creator of light and darkness, who makes peace and fashions all things. In mercy you illumine the world and those who live upon it. In your goodness you daily renew creation. How numerous are your works, Adonai, in wisdom you form them all, filling the earth with your creatures. Be praised, Adonai, our God, for the excellent work of your hands, and for the lights that you created. May they glorify you. Shine a new light upon Zion, that we all may swiftly merit its radiance. Praised are you, Adonai, creator of all heavenly lights. Or Chadash al Tzion Ta'ir. Or Chadash al Tzion Ta'ir. V'nizkechu lanu mehera le'oro. V'nizkechu lanu mehera le'oro. Yadadai bim bam, yadadai bim bam, yadadai bim bim bam, yadadai. Yadadai bim bim bam, yadadai bim bam, yadadai bim bim bam, yadadai. Baruch atah Adonai, Yotzer hameorot. We'll turn now to page 230. We'll read in English at the top of the page and then the Hebrew at the bottom. How deeply you have loved us, Adonai our God, gracing us with surpassing compassion. On account of our forebears whose trust led you to teach them the laws of life, be gracious to us, teaching us as well. O merciful one, have mercy on us by making us able to understand and discern, to heed, learn, and teach, and lovingly to observe, perform, and fulfill all that is in your Torah. V'ha'er eineinu b'toratecha v'dahabek libeinu b'mitzvotecha v'yached levabeinu le'ahava u'yirah et shemecha v'lo nevosh v'lo nikalem v'lo nikashem le'olam va'ed ki v'shem kodshecha Agadol v'anora batachnu Nagila v'nismecha v'yeshuatecha V'ahavieinu l'shalom Me'ahar b'kanfot haaretz V'tolicheinu komemiut le'artzeinu Ki el poel Yeshuot ata uvahanu b'chartam V'keravtanu l'shimcha Hagadol sela b'emet Leodot lecha u'yechetcha b'yahava Baruch atah Adonai Habocher b'amo Yisrael b'yahava Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha Bechol levavcha v'chol nafshecha u'bechol meodecha Ve'hayu hadvarim ha'eleh Asher Anochi Mitzavcha Hayom Al Levavecha Veshinantam Levanecha Vedibartam Bam Veshivtecha B'meitecha Uvelechtecha B'derech U'shokbecha U'kumecha U'kshartam leot al yadecha V'hayu letotafot bein einecha Uktavtam al mezuzot beitecha uvisharecha. We're now on page 236. Vayomer Adonai el Moshe lemor Daber el bnei Yisrael v'amarta lehem v'asu lahem tzitzit al kanfei vigdehem ledorotam v'natnu al tzitzit al kanaf betil techelet v'haya lachem letzitzit uritem oto uschartem et kol mitzvot Adonai v'asitem otam v'lo taturu acharei levavchem v'acharei einechem asher atem zonim achareihem למען תזכרו ועשיתם לכל מצוותיי והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם אני אדוני אלוהיכם אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים להיות לכם לאלוהים אני אדוני אלוהיכם אדוני אלוהיכם אמת. Let's read together in English on the top of page 239. Emet, there is no place where you are not. Even in the wilderness, there is your word. Emet, the pen strokes of lightning, white fire, black flame, stir the soul's passion, guide our sacred way, true and enduring is Torah. Your truth for us is certain and established now and forevermore. Like Moses, Miriam, and all Israel, we sing out and rejoice. As we turn to page 240. In a moment, we'll begin the Amidah together on page 242 and then continue silently. Please go at your own pace, and when you're finished, if you are standing, you may be seated. Adonai sefatai tiftach ufi yagid tehilatecha. Adonai, open up my lips, that my mouth may declare your praise. Okay, if you are seated and you choose to do so, we'll rise as we turn forward to page 324 for the repetition of the Amidah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei Avotenu v'Imotenu Elohei Abraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah, Ha'el Hagadol, Hagibor v'Hanora, El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, V'Koneh Hakol, V'Zocher Chastei Avot v'Imahot, U'mevii Gula Livnei B'neihem, Leman Shemo B'Ahava, Melech Ozer U'Moshia U'Magen, Baruch atah Adonai, Magen Avraham Bezrat Sarah, Atah Gibor Le'olam Adonai, Mechayei Metim Atarav Le'Oshia, Morid Hatam, Mechalkel Chayim B'Chesed, Mechayei Metim Berachamim Rabim, Samech Noflim Verafech Oholim, Umatir Asurim, Umekayem Emunato Lishenei Afar, Michamocha Magevurot, Umida Melech Memit Umechayem, Umatzmiach Yeshua, V'ne'eman ata l'chayot metim. Baruch atah Adonai nechayei hametim. On page 326. Nekadesh et shimcha ba'olam, keshem shemakdishim oto bishmei marom, kakatuv al yad nevi'echa, v'kara zel zer ve'amar, Kadosh, 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 Adonai Tzevaot, Meloch Kol Haaretz, Gevodo. Adir, Adirenu, Adonai, Adonenu, Madir Shimecha Bechol Haaretz, Baruch Kevod Adonai, Mimshamo. Echad hu Eloheinu, hu Avinu Malkeinu, hu Moshienu vehu Yashmienu, verachamav le'enei kol chai. Ani Adonai Elohechem, Yimloch Adonai le'olam, Elohayich Tzion, Ledor Vador, Hallelujah. Page 328. Ledor Vador, Ledor Vador, Ledor Vador, Nagid God Lecha, Ledor Vador, Ledor Vador, Ledor Vador, Nagid God Lecha. ולנצח נצחים קדושתך נקדיש, קדושתך נקדיש, ושבחך אלוהינו מפינו לא ימוש, לעולם לעולם ועד. ברוך אתה אדוני האל הקדוש. Please be seated at home if you're still standing. We're on page 329. Yismechu v'malechutecha shomrei 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 Shabbat v'korei oneg Shabbat. Yismechu v'malechutecha shomrei 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 Shabbat v'korei oneg Shabbat. Mekache shiri Shabbat, kulam yismehu, v'itanu v'tuvecha Shabbat, yismechu v'malechutecha, Shomrei, Shomrei, Shomrei Shabbat, Vekorei Oneg Shabbat. Le'ashmir Ratzita bo v'kidashto Shabbat. Chemdat Yamim, Oto Kerata Shabbat. Yismechu v'malechutecha, Shomrei, Shomrei, Shomrei Shabbat, V'korei Oneg Shabbat. Zecher Lemase Bereshit Shabbat. Zecher Lemase Bereshit Shabbat. Yismechu v'malechutecha, Shomrei, Shomrei, Shomrei Shabbat, V'korei Oneg Shabbat. Eloheinu v'Elokei Avotenu v'Imotenu, Ritzei v'imnuchatenu. Kadeshenu b'mitzvotecha, v'ten chelkeinu b'toratecha. Sameinu mituvecha, v'samechenu b'shuatecha. V'taher libeinu, le'ovdecha be'emet, v'hanchileinu. Adonai Eloheinu, Elai, 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 Be'ahavav ratzon Shabbat kodshecha, v'yinuchu v'Yisrael. Mekadshei shemecha, Baruch atah Adonai, Mekadesh HaShabbat. Okay, we'll read together now on page 330 in English in the middle of the page. On this Shabbat day, as you graciously receive our prayers, help us to hear your call. Grant us enough health to fulfill our duties and the compassion we need to attend to others. Teach us humility that we may perceive our own faults, and grant us the wisdom to be forgiving of others. Give us the courage to be true to our highest selves and the charity to see the best in those around us. Give us patience enough not to become discouraged, hope enough to overcome all fears for the future, and faith enough to know your presence. O source of blessing, look with favor upon us. May our offerings be acceptable to you. Baruch atah Adonai, she'otcha levadcha bira navod. We're now on page 332. We'll begin reading in English at the bottom of the page. For the expanding grandeur of creation, worlds known and unknown, galaxies beyond galaxies filling us with awe and challenging our imaginations, modim anachnu lach. For this fragile planet Earth, its times and tides, its sunsets and seasons, modim anachnu lach. For the joy of human life, its wonders and surprises, its hopes and achievements, modim anachnu lach. For human community, our common past and future hope, our oneness transcending all separation, our capacity to work for peace and justice in the midst of hostility and oppression, modim anachnu lach. For high hopes and noble causes, for faith without fanaticism, for understanding of views not shared, modim anachnu lach. For all who have labored and suffered for a fairer world, who have lived so that others might live in dignity and freedom, modim anachnu lach. For human liberties and sacred rights, for opportunities to change and grow, to affirm and choose, modim anachnu lach. We pray that we may live not by our fears, but by our hopes, not by our words, but by our deeds. Baruch atah Adonai, hatov shimcha ulachana'e lehodot. Now on page 334. Sim shalom tova uvracha chen v'chesed v'rachamim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ha'amecha v'archeinu yotzreinu kulanu kechad ve'or panecha ki ve'or panecha Toratecha natata lanu, Adonai Eloheinu. Sim shalom, tova uvracha, chen v'chesed v'rachamim aleinu, v'hakol Yisrael amecha, Torat chaim v'avat chesed, u'tzedaka u'racha v'rachamim l'chaim v'shalom. Sim shalom, tova uvracha, chen v'chesed v'rachamim aleinu, v'hakol Yisrael amecha, letov einecha levarech et amcha Yisrael, v'chol et u'v'chol sham bishlomecha. Sim shalom, tova uvracha, chen v'chesed v'rachamim aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael amecha. Baruch atah Adonai, hamevarech et amo Yisrael b'shalom. Let's read together on the bottom of page 336. I need strength, humility, courage, patience. Strength to control my passions, humility to assess my own worth, courage to rise above defeats, and patience to cleanse myself of imperfections. And wisdom to learn and live by our sacred teachings. Let me not be discouraged by my failings. Let me take heart from all that is good and noble in my character. Keep me from falling victim to cynicism. Teach me sincerity and enthusiasm. Endow me with perception and courage, that I may serve others with compassion and love. Oseh shalom bimrama, uyaseh shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, al kol yoshvei tevel. Yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael. Shabbat shalom, everybody. Cantor, you can take a little break. This morning we are going to read from Parshat Balak, which is really unique amongst the parshas in the Torah, without a question. And when we get to Torah study, actually, we're going to really read through the narrative, read through the story, and do a sort of close read of it. But just to share a little bit of a thought, of a kernel of an idea that I think is one of the cautionary lessons of the story that is presented in this week's parsha. So before we get to that, if you're following along at home with the Women's Torah Commentary, the parsha begins on page 939, and in the Plat Chumash on page 1050. So Plat Chumash 1050, Women's Commentary 939. And if you're following at home, you're looking for chapter 22, verse 2, not verse 1. It's one of those interesting parshas that begins not where you might think that it would. And again, chapter 22, verse 2 of the book of Numbers, Parshat Balak. So just as a basic reminder, again, the genesis of this story, and remember, in this case, we're thinking sort of in the chronological events of what we talked about last week, the battles against Sichon and Og, right? The people are moving towards the land of Israel. Their interest or their intent is just to be able to pass through the Canaanite lands to be able to get to the land itself. And they try to do that, but Sichon and Og say no, and so they battle, and ultimately the Israelites are triumphant. And so the beginning of this week's portion, we see a shift through the perspective of another one of the local tribes, one that has a more direct connection to our people, and that is ultimately of the Moabites. So we have at the beginning the words in Hebrew, Vayar Balak ben Tzipor et kol asher asa Yisrael Amori. So Balak, son of Tzipor, saw all that Israel had done to the Amorites. And ultimately speaking, what does he do with this seeing? He hires a local, depending on how you describe it, a prophet, a soothsayer, a magician. It just depends on sort of your perspective of things, known as Bil'am. And the main goal is to curse the Israelites so that they will not be as successful against his people as they were against the Amorites, Amorites being a subset of the Canaanites. So that's sort of our beginning, and then the famous story as it goes, which I said in Torah study we'll read through much more carefully and slowly. But one of the places where the rabbis, in really many different commentaries, get sort of hooked onto is the question of what is it that Balak is seeing, that we are told in the first pasuk, right? Vayar Balak. What is it that, in fact, is being seen? Because the object of the Vayar is not obvious in the sentence itself. So rabbis go in many different directions about what it may or may not be. The one I found sort of interesting, and it's more of a meta commentary than specific to that pasuk, comes from a collection known as the Shnei Luchot Habrit. In English, that would mean the 2 tablets of the law. I'm now forgetting the name of the rabbi who wrote it. Best of my memory from classes long ago was, I think it's 16th century Poland. But I'm just not remembering his name. By Torah study, I'll look it up and remind myself. But it's a collection of commentaries on the Torah. And so he says as follows. Balak and Bil'am, right, so both the king of the Moabites and the person hired to curse the Israelites, were both very clever and learned people who used their knowledge to evil purpose. They were both well aware of the close relationship that existed between Israel and its God, and Balak was even wiser than Bil'am. He was privy to the great chain of the dynasty of David and how it would eventually result in the Messiah's descent from David. So just very quickly, let me finish the next sentence and I'll explain. He knew that this very strength of Israel was rooted in himself. This is where in the Hebrew, the next, I think verse 6, it says, Atzum mimeni. So this is a play on the usual translation of it, which means that they are Rav Atzumim, they are too great. The Israelites are too great and overpowering of the people, mimeni, for me, or for my people. But actually what the Shnei Luchot Habrit is suggesting here is that actually Atzum mimeni is referring to himself specifically and to the Moabites. So what is this about? As we may recall from not so long ago from the holiday of Shavuot, we read from Megillat Ruth, the story of Ruth, and we learned from Megillat Ruth herself being a Moabite, who converts to Judaism and takes on the religion of her mother-in-law, that ultimately speaking, David Melech, King David, and the Messiah, Mashiach, who's supposed to be derived from King David, all trace their lineage back to Ruth. And Ruth being a Moabite means that for, again, the wily and sort of smart Balak, realizing that in fact, right, the Moabites, his people, are part of this Davidic dynasty, part of this messianic line. So the reason that he ultimately is afraid of the people, right, the reason Balak becomes afraid is that he realized that purity can emerge from an impure source, and that the good can have an evil source. So ultimately speaking, he's saying, right, sort of, and this is really the rabbi's commentary being placed upon Balak more likely than not, right, which is to say that, even from, right, potentially an antagonizer, an enemy of the Israelites, from that group of people is what emerges our ultimate savior, right, both in the personification of King David in the times where King David was necessary, but ultimately in the Mashiach for many, many generations to come. So this is why he says that that Balak's mind worked overtime to devise a plan to sever this close relationship between Israel and its God. In other words, he wanted to reverse the relationship. He wanted to reclaim, in his mind, for the Moabites, the mantle of the connection to God, right? That rather than being sort of a pass-through, that they, in fact, should be the chosen people of God, not the other way around. And so he ultimately wants to try to reverse it. And he thought that if he were to succeed and all the deeds of valor that would be performed by David in the future, or in other words, that if he were to do even greater things than David's scenario in the future, would accrue to his own people instead of to Israel, ultimately speaking, all of the blessings that God has given. And this is why the paragraph starts by telling us Balak, son of Zippor, saw all that Israel had done to the Amorites. Okay, ultimately speaking, right, that's what this whole conversation is about. So what is the lesson in this, or what is the takeaway in this? And this is where I've been sort of, thinking about it a lot. What is the Shnei Luchot Habrit describing Balak and Bil'am as, right? He calls them, wise in their own way, discerning in their own way, and really sort of wily in their own way. they see a certain circumstance before them, and they attempt to, or at least Balak attempts through Bilam, to manipulate the situation to the best effect possible for him and for his own people. So we, of course, begin this parsha, and we always consider Balak as really, an enemy of the Israelites, therefore an eternal enemy of the Jews, as a sort of terrible, person, an evil personification, all of those things, of which he may have been. But I think there is another part of this that we need to be a little bit more, I don't know what the word is, but to see ourselves in a little bit more, right? Is this real tendency of human beings to use clever manipulation to change the circumstances to our benefit and oftentimes to the exclusion of the other. Or in other words, that we view the world through the false dichotomy of either have or have not, this is mine or this is not. And so as a result of it, our natural tendency as human beings is to, even if we're unconscious of it, to manipulate people, circumstances, situations, and in the case of Balak, to even attempt, with the chutzpah of it all, to manipulate God. Okay, and I'll explain a little bit more about what it means. So Balak had a vision of an imminent sin Israel would commit, and provided, right, ultimately speaking, I skipped a little bit ahead of time. Sorry, one second. Okay. As mentioned, Balak was well aware of the cosmic forces and the role Israel played. And in order to loosen the bond between Israel and God, he wanted Bilam to curse them at the precise moment in time when God is, quote-unquote, angry. The significance of a curse is to reinforce the voice of the accuser who brings Israel's iniquities to God's attention at that moment when God allows himself to be angry. I love that phrase, right? That's the only way that the rabbis can conceive of God having emotions, is that God is allowing God's self to have those emotions, which I think is really a whole other conversation worth having. Okay, but the ideal situation here, what they're trying to do basically, and this is where it gets sort of interesting, it's hopping ahead to the end of the portion, is that the Shnei Luchot HaBrit is suggesting that Balak, being as discerning as he is, he has a vision, and the vision is of what's going to happen at the end of the portion, in which the Israelites start to cohabit with the Midianite women, right, the Moabite women, and ultimately this leads to the rather grisly beginning of Parshat Pinchas next week, and really begins at the end of this week's portion. So knowing that the Israelites are going to have this problem, Balak wants to sort of curse them to create the circumstances where God will basically punish and therefore sever the relationship with the Israelites and turn to his side and say, well, how about this wonderful guy Balak and his people? Maybe they will be a better choice than the Israelites. And so, again, it's sort of this, I think this belief a lot of times that it's only the sort of evil machinations of, political figures, kings, sovereigns, that are capable of thinking of all of these manipulative tactics in order to get the outcome that they desire. But I think the reality is we all do this, and we all do this much more frequently than we realize, right? We see a circumstance in which we can benefit, and oftentimes that benefit needs to come at somebody else losing their station or their status. And perhaps not as overtly as Balak does. We're not hiring people to curse anybody. We're not, getting voodoo dolls and poking them. But we think in our minds, right? We think, boy, our circumstance would be so much easier if this person weren't around, or if this person was not in a position above me. And maybe I'm not going to actively try to take them out of that space, but I'm not going to actively help them to fix the problems of their leadership or to fix the realities of what's broken. And I think there is a real danger in here that we can all really become Balak, that we can really all find ourselves in a similar kind of situation where with some amount of forethought and planning, that we can manipulate the circumstances around us to really benefit us at the exclusion of others. And I just want us to really think about that deeply and to think about the ways in which we do that both really subtly and the ways that we do that overtly, the ways that we do that as individuals amongst our own individual relationships, and the ways in which we do that within our institutions, within our political bodies, within our country, and with ultimately in the world. I think manipulation is something that in and of itself is value neutral. Right? The word itself is a word that we use all the time. We manipulate all sorts of things without any positive or negative attributions. But the moment that we begin to affect the people around us with an intention to benefit ourselves, there is really almost no other way to see the fact that while there are times in which it is perfectly acceptable, right, as the great teaching goes, Yemena nili mili, right, if I'm not going to be myself, who's going to be for me? But there is an end to that teaching as well, right? It has a balance. It can't just be about us. It can't just be about us always having the best outcome. Sometimes the best outcome actually is allowing things to play out as they are meant to play out. And if Balak had simply done nothing, literally done nothing, then this story would be a very different story. The Israelites would have passed by his property, by his land, would have entered the land of Israel, and very likely they would have maintained actually a cordial kind of relationship because of the Moabite connection through Ruth. But instead, because he becomes antsy, he becomes disconcerted, vayar, he sees something that makes him concerned, and he acts upon that concern in a selfish fashion, ultimately speaking, his people, himself, and really everyone around ends up suffering. This is one of those sad stories in which, unfortunately, there isn't a happy ending. In the end of it, even after Balaam is turned back and Balak is turned back, right? At the end of the story, we see what happens again with Pinchas and with the the really sort of grisly stuff that takes place. So I think that if anything, this is a portion that certainly is interesting as a narrative, and we'll read into it more later. But I think as a sort of cautionary tale, it seems to me that it is presenting us some really important things for us to consider, again, individually, but also collective. So with that, I wish you all a Shabbat Shalom. A reminder again, we're going to begin reading from the beginning of the Parsha, page 939 in the Women's Torah Commentary, and 1050 in the Plaut Chumash. Before we get to any of the reading, though, we will take the Torah, it's not out, but get ourselves all set. We'll begin Seder Kriyat HaTorah on page 362, and we rise in body or spirit. Ein kamocha be'Elohim Adonai ve'ein kemasecha malchutcha malchut kol olamim u'memshaltecha bechol dor v'hador Adonai melech Adonai malach Adonai imloch le'olam va'en Adonai oz le'amo yitein Adonai yevarech et amo b'shalom Abba harachamim heitiv avirtzoncha et Zion Tivnei chomot Yerushalayim Ki becha levad batachnu Melech el ram benisa Adon olamim Ki mitzion tetzei Torah Ki mitzion tetzei Torah Udevar Adonai miYerushalayim Baruch Shenatan Torah, Torah, Baruch Shenatan Torah, Torah, Ne'amo Yisrael, B'Kedushato. Shema Yisrael, Adonai, Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Echad Eloheinu Gadol Adonenu Kadosh Shemo.
Echad Eloheinu Gadol Adonenu Kadosh Shemo.
Gadol Adonai Tzioner Olam Shemo Yachdav. Echad Adonai Hagedula Ve'Hagevura Ve'Hatiferet Ve'Hanetzach Ve'Hahod Ki chol b'shamayim u'ba'aretz Ki chol b'shamayim u'ba'aretz Lecha Adonai הממלכה והמתנשא לכל ראש. רוממו אדוני אלוהינו והשתחוו להר קודשו. רוממו אדוני אלוהינו והשתחוו להר קודשו. Ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu Romemu. Ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu Romemu. Okay, again, we're going to start from the beginning of the parsha. Well, hopefully we're paying attention to the page numbers. I've lost track, but Numbers 22, verse 2. And Baruch Hu et Adonai HaBorach. Baruch Adonai HaBorach le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah. Amen. Vayar Bach ben Sipur et kol asher asa Yisrael le'emorim. Vayagor Moav mipnei ha'am me'od ki rav hu. Vayakotz Moav mipnei bnei Yisrael. Vayomer Moav et ziknei Midian. Ata yelachechu akahal et kol sevivotenu. Ki locho chashor et yerek hasadeh. Uvalach ben Zipor melech lemoav beit hahim. Vayishlach malachim et Bil'am ben Beor. Peturah asher al hanar. Eretz bnei amo likro lo lemor. Hine am yatsa mimitzrayim. Hine chisa et ein haaretz lehu yoshev mimulim. Ve'ata lechana alim et ha'am hazeh. Ki atzum hu mimeni. Ulai uchal nakebo. Va'agarishenu min haaretz. Ki yadati et asher tevarech mevorach v'asher ta'or yu'ar. Vayelechu ziknei Moav veziknei Midian ukesamim beyadam. Vayavo el Bil'am vayedabru elav dibrei Balak. Vayomer alehem linu po halayla v'hashivoti etchem davar kasher yedaber Adonai elayim. V'yashuvu sarei Moav im Bil'am. V'yavo Elohim el Bil'am. V'hayomer mi hanashim ha'ele imach. V'yomer Bil'am et el ha'Elohim. Balach ben Zipor melech Moav shalach elim. Hine ha'am hayotze mimitzrayim. Vayechas et ein haaretz ata lecha kavali oto ulai uchal lehilachem bo v'gerashtiv. Vayomer Elohim el Bil'am lo telech imahem. Lo ta'or etam ki baruchu. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu asher natan lanu Torat emet v'chayei olam nata betochenu Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah. Before we do Hag Ben Galila, we'll take a moment to offer our Mishaberach, our prayer for healing on page 371. Mishaberach Avotenu v'imotenu Avraham Yitzchak v'Yaakov Sarah Rivka Rachel v'Leah Hu yivarech et hacholim ha'elu. We think this morning of Jim Cohn, Monique Renee Banks Rathbun, Lindsay Epstein, Dolores Michka, Sylvia Orn, Yerachmiel Ben Hinda, Paloma Chauhan, Samuel Moskowitz, Audrey Lubo, Chaim Leib, Robert Posner and Joyce Weinberg, Rick Gold, Stu Pollock, Jane London, Catherine Guarino, Emunah Chava, Deirdre Klein, Stephanie Skitt, Judy Stern, Miriam Cornfield, Raz Brody, Chana Ruth Batsara, Marlise Silverberg, Susan Spruce, Fagel Tzipora, Bat Elisheva Batsara, Richard Gambino, Michelle Sawicki, Idolbasha Bat Yitzchak, Tzvi Menachem Ben Chaim, Rivka Bat Devora, Amy and Gavin Tucker, Janice Kurz, David Dowling, Israel Ben Yitzchak, Ben Sion Ben Moshe, Lorraine Danis, Buddy Kassoff, Shelley Newmark, David Kyle Klotman, Rivka Bat Rachel, Sarah Bat Chana, Moshe Eliezer Ben Sivia, Peretz Ben Yehuda, and Leah Bat Naomi. If you're thinking of anyone else this morning who's in need of healing, I invite you to say their names aloud or simply hold them in your hearts, and this will be the time to do that. HaKadosh Baruch Hu yimalei rachamim aleihem lehachalimam u'lerapotam lechazikam v'yishlach lehem mehira refuah shlema min hashamayim, refuat hanefesh, refuat haguf, hashta b'agalav zman kariv, and omar amen. May the one who blessed our ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, bless and heal those who are suffering. May the Blessed Holy One be filled with compassion for their health to be restored and their strength to be revived. May God swiftly send them a complete renewal of body and spirit, and let us say together, Amen. El na refana la, el na refana la, el na refana la, refuah shelema, el na refana lo, el na refana lo, el na refana lo, refuah shelema. We'll turn now to the bottom of page 370 in our prayer books as we lift and dress the Torah. Vezot HaTorah asher sam Moshe lifnei Yisrael al pi Adonai b'yad Moshe. Torah, 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 Torah tziva lanu Moshe. Torah, 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 Torah tziva lanu Moshe. Torah, 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 Torah tziva lanu Moshe. Torah, 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 Torah tziva lanu Moshe. Okay, if you're still standing at home, please be seated. So this morning's Haftarah, if you have a copy of the Plat Chumash, begins on page 1069. 1069. If you're following in another fashion, you're looking for the prophet Micah, the book of Micah, chapter 5, verse 6 to chapter 6, verse 8. Again, prophet Micah, or Micha, chapter 5, verse 6 to chapter 6, verse 8. And before we start reading, we're going to turn to page 372 for our opening blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar b'nviim tovim v'ratza b'divreihem hanemarim be'emet. Baruch atah Adonai abocher b'Torah u'v'Moshe avdo u'v'Yisrael amo b'nvi'ei ha'emet v'tzedek. The remnant of Jacob shall be among the many nations like dewdrops from the eternal, like showers on the grass, which don't tarry for mortals or wait for human beings. The remnant of Jacob shall be among the nations in the midst of many peoples, like a lion among the animals of the forest, a young lion among flocks of sheep that roams and tramples and tears with none to save. Your hand shall overcome your foes, your enemies shall all be cut off. On that day, says the Eternal One, I will cut off your war horses from your midst, and do away with your chariots. I will cut off the cities of your land, and tear down all of your fortresses. I will cut off the sorceries you practice. No longer shall you have soothsayers. I will cut off your idols and pillars from your midst. No longer shall you bow down to the work of your hands. I will uproot the Asherim from your midst. I will destroy your idols. In anger and wrath I will execute vengeance upon the nations that did not obey me. Hear now what the Eternal is saying. Rise, put your case to the mountains. Let the hills hear your voice. Hear the case of the Eternal, you mountains. Give ear, you foundations of the earth. The Eternal has a case against our people and will contend with Israel. My people, what wrong have I done to you? Have I exhausted your patience? Answer me. In fact, I brought you up from the land of Egypt, redeemed you from the house of bondage, and sent Moses, Aaron, and Miriam to lead you. My people, remember what Balak, king of Moab, planned, and how Balaam, son of Beor, answered him. Remember your journey from Shittim to Gilgal, and you will understand God's victorious acts. With what should I come to the Eternal and bow down before God on high? Should I come before God with burnt offerings, with yearling calves? Would the Eternal be pleased with thousands of rams, with 10,000 rivers of oil? Should I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for my own sin? It has been told you, O mortal, what is good, and what the Eternal requires of you. Only this, to do justly, and love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. Some of the most important Torah you will ever hear. We'll turn back to our prayer books, page 372, very bottom of the page. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, tzur kol haolamim, tzadik bechol hadorot, ha'el ha'ne'eman ha'omer ve'oseh, hamdaber u'mkayem, shekol devarav emet v'tzedek, al ha'torah ve'al ha'avodah ve'al ha'nemim ve'al yom ha'shabbat hazeh, שנתת לנו אדוני אלוהינו לקדושה ולמנוחה לכבוד ולתפארת על הכל אדוני אלוהינו אנחנו מודים לך ומברכים אותך יתברך שמך בפי כל חי תמיד לעולם ועד ברוך אתה אדוני מקדש השבת Amen. I'll invite everyone at home to rise in body or spirit as we turn to page 376 to offer a prayer for our country, and then 377, a prayer for the state of Israel. Thus says Adonai, this is what I desire, to unlock the fetters of wickedness and untie the cords of lawlessness, to let the oppressed go free, to break off every yoke. Share your bread with the hungry and take the wretched poor into your home, and when you see the naked, give clothing. Do not ignore your own kin. If you banish the yoke from your midst, the menacing hand, the evil speech, if you offer compassion to the hungry and satisfy the famished creature, then your light shall shine in darkness. O guardian of life and liberty, may our nation always merit your protection. Teach us to give thanks for what we have by sharing it with those who are in need. Keep our eyes open to the wonders of creation and alert to the care of the earth. May we never be lazy in the work of peace, and may we honor those who have died in defense of our ideals. Grant our leaders wisdom and forbearance. May they govern with justice and compassion. Help us all to appreciate one another and to respect the many ways that we may serve you. May our homes be safe from affliction and strife, and our country be sound in body and spirit. Amen. Turn down to page 377. Avinu Shebashamayim Tzur Yisrael L'Goalo, Barech et Medinat Yisrael Reshit Tzmichat Geulatenu. Hagen aleha be'evrat chastecha, ufros aleha sukat shlomecha, ushlach orcha ba'amidcha l'rasheha sareha be'yoatzeha. V'taknem be'etzah tova milfanecha, v'natata shalom ba'aretz, v'simchat olam liyoshveha, v'nomar, Amen. O Heavenly One, Protector and Redeemer of Israel, bless the state of Israel, which marks the dawning of hope for all who seek peace. Shield it beneath the wings of your love, spread over it the canopy of your peace. Send your light and truth to all who lead and advise, guiding them with your good counsel. Establish peace in the land and fullness of joy for all who dwell there. Amen. We will remain standing in body or spirit as the Torah service is concluded on page 374. Yehalelu et Shem Adonai, ki niskav shemo levado, hodo al haaretz v'shamayim, vayaharem keren li'amo, tehila lechol chasidav livnei Yisrael, Am kerovo, hallelujah, hallelujah. Ki lekach tov natati lachem, torati al tazovu. Et chaim hi lamhachazikim ba, vetomcheha meushar deracheha. Darchei noam v'chol netivoteha shalom. Hashivenu Adonai elecha ben hashuva. Chadesh, chadesh yameinu, chadesh yameinu kekedem. Remain standing in body or spirit as we turn to page 586 at the bottom of the page. Aleinu l'shabeach. Aleinu l'shabeach l'adon hakol, latet gedula liotzer breshit, shelo asanu kegoye ha'aratzot, velo samanu kemishpechot ha'adama, shelo sam chelkenu kahem, vegor aleinu kechol hamonam. V'anachnu korim u'mishtachavim u'modim lifnei melech malchei hamlachim hakadosh baruch hu. V'nemar v'haya Adonai lemelech al kol haaretz. Vayom hahu yeh Adonai echad. Ushemo echad. Invite those in mourning and those observing yahrzeit to remain standing in body or spirit. As we turn to page 598, before we offer the mourner's Kaddish, we'll remember those first who have passed in recent months. Miles Ambrose, Morris Dickstein, Fred Eber, Sandra Furman, Evelyn Gelb, Lucy Gladstone, Lois Herr, Phyllis Katz, Jeanette Kopp, Morty Lynn, Jerry Monroe, Madge Judith Parcher, Steve Popkin, Danielle Lisa Rigg, Geraldine Rosen, Harriet Roth, Paul Silver, Joan Strong, Tangzilius, Virginia Tizer, and Ann Weiss. We also mark the yahrzeits that occurred during the last week for Anna Busbang, Thelma Center, Ruth Cooper, Irving Kornblath, Joseph Egelfeld, Sadie Eisner, Stephen Garson, Morris Heller, Springer Heller, Sarah Krennick, Henry LaBelle, Morris Meyer, Dora Miller, Max Olswang, Elena Osofsky, Abraham Protas, Max Rach, Anna Schmidt, Ed Silverberg, Ted Tatcon, Abraham Zaltis, and Jean Zaretsky. And if you have a name of someone for whom you're saying Kaddish at home, this would be the time to share them out loud or to hold them in your heart. I'll invite the mourners to join me on page 598. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah. Be'alma divra chirutei v'yamlich malchutei. B'chayechon u'v'yomechon u'v'chayei d'chol beit Yisrael. Ba'agala v'zman kariv v'imru. Amen. Yehei shemei Rabbah mevarach le'alam le'lamei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh. V'yitadar v'yit'aleh v'yitalal shemei d'kudsha b'richu. Leila min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechamata da'amiran be'alma v'imru amen. Yehei shalama rabba min shemaya v'chaim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav hu yaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Zichronam livracha, may every one of their memories be for a blessing. Okay, please be seated at home if you're still standing. Shabbat shalom, everybody. Shabbat shalom, Cantor Lauren. Some announcements very important this week. First is to join us for Torah study beginning at 12 o'clock noon, and that will be on Zoom. Also, a reminder that tomorrow, Sunday at 11 o'clock, is our next installment of the wonderful book group led by Ruth Joseph. You can still join up, I'm pretty sure, but you must contact Ruth and arrange to get these stories in advance. Be prepared for the discussion tomorrow at 11 o'clock. If you don't know how to get in touch with Ruth, please let us or the office know, and we will be happy to help you and connect you. Nina Mitzvah will meet on Monday at 11:30, and if you're interested in joining them, please contact Andrea Fagan. The Social Justice Committee will meet at 5 o'clock on Zoom. Hopefully this week my classes will resume. Wednesday at 12 o'clock, my class on Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel and the Prophets, and on Friday, my class about the Siddur. Also a reminder that a lot of things are changing. We hope for the better next week. We're excited. And it's important, very, very important to pay attention to those changes, especially if you are one of our wonderful regulars who comes for Shabbat all the time, because almost everything has been changed at least slightly. The first is that we will resume our Shabbat by the Bay services, which are our young families or families with young children-oriented services that we've done for the last several summers, located at Havens Beach here in Sag Harbor. The service itself will start at 5:30, but we're also going to have some shmooze time and a Tikkun Olam, a social justice project that myself and Cantor Lauren and Shelley Lichtenstein, our Hebrew school director, are putting together. And that will begin at 5 o'clock in Havens Beach, and then the service again will begin at 5:30. It's not a long service, but we have a wonderful time with it. Just a reminder again, though, in that case, if it rains and it's washed out. So please pay close attention. If you're not sure, call the office during the day. Unlike Cor Maria, where we had registration, for this we do not, so I have no way of really contacting people ahead of time. We'll do our best to keep people up to date on it, but please check in if you're not sure. Also, a reminder that beginning next Friday, we will resume indoor services for those that have been fully vaccinated, which includes the 2-week period afterwards. At the moment, that is the only allowance that we can have indoors. So again, services will be at 7:30 beginning next Friday night through the end of July and August. All of our services will be live streamed, website, YouTube, Facebook, and in addition to that, after services are over, we will have a Zoom set up here in the sanctuary of the Whalers Church. That way, anybody who is not able to join us in person can still share in a little bit of camaraderie and community building together. I'll set up a little TV screen with some cameras and stuff over in the corner, so anybody who wants to hop on that Zoom after services most likely be somewhere around 8:30. So again, that begins next Friday. Very important, though, if you can, please send in your vaccination cards or evidence of vaccination to the office ahead of time in whatever way feels most comfortable to you. That way we will already have you on our roster and can come in much more easily. It'll help us expedite getting people into the building. And again, if you have questions about any of this, you're unsure about anything, please call Eileen in the office this week and we'll be happy to explain. The other significant change is on Saturday mornings. In order to accommodate for Torah study remaining at noon on Zoom, because we can't really have it since we can't serve food, we can't have it in person in any realistic kind of way. So we're moving the service up, its start time up to 9:30, so that it will end by about 11, and that way anybody who comes in person will have ample time to get home and to get themselves situated for our Zoom Torah study. So again, beginning next Shabbat, next Saturday morning, services will begin at 9:30, not at 10 o'clock. So I hope we will see you at some point after it begins. Also, just a reminder, in July, we have, in addition to our regular classes and Shabbat services, we have a tour of the Medu Conservancy with a wine and cheese on July 11th, and also a Havdalah Harbor Sunset Cruise on July 24th, which requires a paid reservation, and it must be in by July 8th, otherwise the cruise cannot happen. So we hope you can join us for that. You want to come to that?
Say?
You want to come to that?
Yeah, that sounds like fun.
So maybe we can arrange that. That might actually help us a little bit. Would Aaron come for that, the July 24th weekend?
Possibly.
Okay, we'll talk about that. That'd be nice. Hey, Cantor Lauren, now it's an improving trip. It's not just the rabbi on a boat, right? We have a Cantor too. So with all of that, any other details that I might have missed, please make sure you're checking out our e-blasts and our websites and all those good things. And I'm sure the next couple of weeks we'll have some hiccups here and there, but we'll persevere through as we always do. So, with that said, Cantor, you want to come up? We'll do anything. You want to do a Donal Lum or something? Okay, good. We'll do a Donal Lum, and then we'll do Kiddush. So, a Donal Lum is 625, if memory serves. Look at that, 625. Whatever melody you like.
Oh, I'll
You'll go with me. Okay, we'll do the old classic. Adon olam asher malach beterem kol yetzir nivra לעת נשא בחפצו כל אזי מלך שמו נקרא ואחרי ככלות הכל לבדו ימלוך נורא והוא היה והוא הווה והוא יהיה בתפארה והוא אחד ואין שני להמשילו להכבירה בלי ראשית בלי תכלית ולא העוז והמשרה והוא אלי וחי גואלי וצור חבלי בעת צרה והוא ניסי ומנוס לי מנת כוסי ביום אקרא בידו אפקיד רוחי בעת אישן והעירה נעים רוחי גביעתי אדוני לי ולא יירא. Okay, if you'll turn to page 605, and if you have a Kiddush cup handy, grape juice, wine, whatever, you can join with me. Page 604, sorry. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם ביני ובין בני ישראל אותי לעולם אותי לעולם ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם כי ששת ימים עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם וביום השביעי שבת וינפש שבת וינפש שבת וינפש ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. על כן ברך אדוני את יום השבת ויקדשהו סברי ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם בורא פרי הגפן Amen. Chaim. Okay, Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Hope to see you for Torah study in just a little bit. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom.